Hope is the thing that lives in us. For a long time after she died, I thought I had lost that spirit completely. I went through the motions of living. You wake up, throw on yesterday's shirt, eat something you barely taste, and just keep going. The days blended together like someone had turned down the color on my life. I kept thinking, is this it? Just marking time until it's my turn. My daughter called every couple of days. She was pretending to check on me, but really just making sure I hadn't burned down the house again. She lives 2 states away with her own family, kids who always need something. She'd suggest I get out more. One day she called and said, "Dad, you need to be around people. What about that senior center? They have bingo on Wednesdays." I smiled a little and said back to her, "Bingo? Sweetheart, I'll go if losing counts as a form of worship." She laughed at that, but I could hear the worry underneath it. After she passed, I tried cooking for myself. Let's just say the smoke alarm and I were on a first-name basis for a while. My daughter even signed me up for yoga once. The instructor looked at me and said calmly, "Breathe deeply." I looked right back and said, "If I bend any further, you'll have to call the fire department." That got a few laughs from the other folks in the class. Then one afternoon in early October, I decided to clean out some drawers. Beats me why I did it that day. Maybe the coffee was stronger than usual. I started with the desk in the spare bedroom. I was sorting through old bills and papers when I found a small notebook tucked in the back. One of those composition books with the black and white marbled cover. I opened it carefully, and there in her handwriting that always leaned to the right like it was in a hurry, was a single entry. Just a few words, really. It said, "Keep singing, especially on the silent days, not for others, for yourself. Because faith isn't what you feel, it's what you do when you can't feel anything at all." That was it. Nothing more. She'd written that and never mentioned it, just left it there like a message in a bottle. I sat on the floor of that spare room and cried like a kid who dropped his ice cream. No dignity, just honesty. Something in me unclenched. The tears just came, and I didn't try to stop them. I figured the carpet had seen worse. She didn't mean singing like music. She meant keep living, keep trying. That's what comfort really is. It's deciding to take another step even when you can't see where the path leads. From that day on, something shifted. I began to hum again, just like she used to. Not perfectly, not loudly, not even on key, which probably had the neighbors wondering if I'd lost my mind. Hope, I learned, doesn't vanish when someone dies. It just waits for us to remember its rhythm. I started doing small things differently. I began watering that fern. Turns out plants are more forgiving than we give them credit for. I started taking morning walks, mostly because the doctor said so. My neighbors think I'm training for a marathon. Truth is, I'm just chasing the newspaper before it blows away. A neighbor I barely knew left cookies on my porch last Christmas. No note, just cookies in a tin with snowflakes. I still don't know who it was. Maybe that's how hope shows up sometimes. Not loud, not fancy, just quietly sweet, like cookies on the porch. One Sunday morning in early November, I went back to church. I'd stopped going because it hurt too much to sit in that pew without her beside me. But that Sunday, I felt ready. I got dressed in my good shirt, drove the familiar route, and walked through those heavy wooden doors that creak the same way they did 30 years ago. I took my usual seat, 3rd row from the back on the right side. Old habits die hard. The service began, and then the choir stood to sing. You can probably guess what song they chose. "You Raise Me Up." Of all the hymns in the book, they picked that one. I tried to sing, but what came out was more of a sniffle solo, loud enough for the choir to turn around. My eyes filled with tears, and I just stood there while everyone else sang. But here's the strange thing. Even though I couldn't sing, even though tears were running down my cheeks, I felt lighter. It was as if someone had quietly placed a warm hand on my shoulder and said without words, "It's okay. You're going to be okay. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Just keep showing up." That moment reminded me of what Emily Dickinson understood. Hope isn't something we find outside ourselves. It's something that already lives inside us, planted deep, patiently waiting to be noticed again. After church, old friends came up to me. They shook my hand, hugged me tight, told me they were glad to see me. No drama. Just warmth, the kind that sticks with you. Nobody mentioned me crying. They just welcomed me with coffee and those little cookies that are never quite sweet enough. One of the ladies from the choir, Margaret, came up and squeezed my arm. She looked at me with kind eyes and said, "We've missed you. Would you consider joining us for choir practice on Thursdays? We could use another voice, even if it cracks a little." I actually laughed at that, maybe for the first time in months. I said back to her, "Margaret, my voice doesn't crack. It shatters. But I'll think about it." She smiled like she knew I'd show up. And you know what? I did.